Eastern Front, July 1944. The German lines, stretching across the flat, scarred landscape, presented an unsettling tableau of quietude. This silence, however, was not the peace of an abandoned battlefield, but the taut stillness preceding a cataclysm, a deceptive calm designed to mask the formidable strength of a prepared defense, its true nature hidden from the probing eyes of Soviet reconnaissance. The stakes were immense. The survival of Army Group Center, the integrity of the Eastern Front, and the continuation of the war itself hinged on the ability of these seemingly inert positions to absorb and then repel the anticipated Soviet offensive. Just after 400 hours, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor began to propagate through the earth, a precursor to the storm. Oberleutnant Karl Richter, a fortifications engineer attached to the 9th Army's Pioneer Battalion, 51, felt it first through the soles of his worn boots as he conducted a final inspection of a forward strongpoint. His expertise lay in the precise geometry of defense, the calculated interplay of concrete, wire, and earth that could transform a vulnerable trench into a redoubt. From the observation slit of a Type 23 pillbox, the horizon appeared undisturbed, a uniform gray under the pre-dawn light. Yet, Richter knew this placid facade concealed a depth of defensive layering that had consumed months of relentless labor. His unit's daily logs recorded the expenditure of 1,200 cubic meters of concrete and 80 tons of barbed wire in this sector alone over the preceding 6 weeks, a testament to the meticulous construction beneath the superficial calm. The primary defensive belt, known as the Buffelstelling, or buffalo position, comprised 3 staggered trench lines, each reinforced with timber and revetted with sandbags, linked by a network of communication trenches. These were fronted by dense fields of S-mines and Teller mines, laid at a density of approximately 2,000 anti-personnel and 500 anti-tank mines per kilometer of front, according to the ordnance reports Richter had personally signed off on. Behind these, carefully camouflaged machine gun nests and anti-tank positions, often built into existing farmhouses or natural depressions, awaited activation. Richter's plans, meticulously drawn to scale, detailed the interlocking fields of fire, the precise angles of each embrasure, and the designated fallback positions. He had personally overseen the placement of the 7.5 centimeter pack 40 anti-tank guns, ensuring their fields of fire overlapped to create kill zones 300 meters deep. The quiet appearance from the Soviet side belied the presence of over 300 such guns across the 9th Army's 100-kilometer front, each one a silent guardian. The infantry, dug deep into their positions, maintained radio silence, their presence betrayed only by the occasional glint of a helmet or the faint scent of stale tobacco. They were the human component of this intricate machine, their training focused on enduring the initial shock and then engaging the enemy in close-quarters combat within the prepared defenses. Their unit rosters indicated an average of 120 men per kilometer of front, a density considered adequate for holding against a conventional assault, provided the fortifications held. The true strength of the German lines was not in their visibility, but in their deliberate invisibility, their capacity to absorb immense force before revealing their true, deadly nature. This quiet was the breath held before an explosion. The German lines, a seemingly unbroken scar across the vast Eastern Front, held their breath in the pre-dawn chill. For weeks, the quiet had been a deception, a thin veneer over the colossal preparations unfolding just beyond their observation. Soviet forward observers, often operating under the cover of darkness or camouflaged within the sparse woodlands, had meticulously charted every German strongpoint, every trench line, every suspected command bunker, their sketches accumulating into a grim cartography of destruction. Behind these silent eyes, the Red Army was assembling an unprecedented concentration of firepower, Production logs from the Ural factories indicated a staggering output. Over 12,000 field guns, howitzers, and Katyusha rocket launchers were being positioned along a front less than 400 kilometers wide. This density, reaching an average of 250 guns per kilometer in critical sectors, dwarfed any previous artillery deployment in history, a stark quantitative leap from the more dispersed engagements of earlier campaigns. The logistical challenge was immense, requiring the movement of millions of shells. Railway manifests documented the ceaseless flow of ammunition trains, each car laden with 76mm, 122mm, 152mm, and 203mm rounds, along with the distinctive crates of M13 rockets. Under the perpetual cloak of night, these munitions were unloaded and ferried to camouflaged depots, then manhandled into the firing positions, often by hand, to avoid any telltale engine noise. Specialized engineering battalions worked tirelessly, constructing new roads and reinforcing existing ones to bear the weight of the heavy artillery pieces. Dug-in emplacements, carefully concealed with netting and natural foliage, became the silent homes for thousands of guns, their muzzles pointing west, awaiting the command. Unit diaries frequently noted the back-breaking labor, the constant vigilance against German aerial reconnaissance, and the absolute secrecy demanded of every soldier involved. Beyond the physical preparations, a sophisticated system of fire control was being established. Forward observer teams, equipped with improved field telephones and radio sets, were linked directly to battalion and regimental artillery commanders, who in turn coordinated with divisional and army-level headquarters. This hierarchical structure, refined through bitter experience, aimed to ensure a synchronized, overwhelming barrage, a single, devastating hammer blow rather than a series of disconnected strikes. The ideological imperative behind this massive undertaking was clear: to shatter the German defensive will, to overwhelm their positions not just with shrapnel and high explosives, but with an unanswerable, terrifying display of Soviet industrial and military might. It was to be a demonstration that no fortification, no matter how well constructed, could withstand such concentrated fury. A psychological weapon as much as a physical one. The silence, therefore, was not merely an absence of sound, but the compressed spring of immense destructive energy. The German lines, outwardly placid, belied an intricate calculation of destruction unfolding across the Soviet rear. Artillery pieces, ranging from the ubiquitous 76.2mm IS-3 divisional gun to the monstrous 203mm B-4 howitzer, were being emplaced with a precision born of necessity and grim experience. Each battery position, every gun pit, had been surveyed and resurveyed, its firing data meticulously computed to converge on specific points within the German defensive network. The sheer volume of ordnance required a logistical effort that dwarfed previous campaigns. Railway manifests, compiled from factory output logs, indicated the movement of 12,000 wagons carrying artillery shells in the week preceding the offensive. This translated to an average of 1,000 rounds per gun for the lighter field pieces, escalating to 200 rounds for the heaviest howitzers, a scale of expenditure previously unimaginable. The shells themselves, primarily high explosive and fragmentation types, were designed to maximize personnel casualties and disrupt fortifications. Soviet production statistics from 1943 showed a monthly output exceeding 1.2 million artillery shells of various calibers, a figure that had steadily climbed from the desperate days of 1941. This industrial might, coupled with the Red Army's deep operational doctrine favoring massed artillery, provided the material basis for the impending firestorm. German intelligence estimates, gleaned from aerial reconnaissance and prisoner interrogations, consistently underestimated the true concentration of Soviet guns, often by a factor of 2 or 3. The strategic implication of this mathematical approach was to overwhelm German defenses through sheer kinetic energy rather than tactical finesse. It was a blunt instrument, yet one wielded with terrifying efficiency. The objective was not merely to suppress enemy fire, but to obliterate it, to pulverize strong points and create pathways for the advancing infantry and armor. The ideological underpinning was clear. The collective will of the Soviet state, expressed through its industrial capacity, would crush the individual German soldier. The silence along the front was therefore not a sign of inactivity, but the taut calm before a meticulously engineered hurricane. Every gun barrel, every shell, stacked neatly in its crate, represented a fraction of a larger, annihilating sum. The horizon would soon attest to this arithmetic. The quiet of the German lines, that deceptive stillness, shattered with the first volleys. 1,000 artillery pieces, then 2,000, then 5, unleashed their fury simultaneously, a coordinated orchestral detonation of steel and high explosive. The earth itself bucked and groaned under the sustained impact, a geological event triggered by human hands. Observation logs from German forward posts, those few that survived the initial minutes, describe the sky not as a canopy, but as a solid, incandescent sheet of fire. The horizon, once a demarcation of land and air, dissolved into an unbroken wall of flame and smoke, punctuated by the blinding flashes of incoming shells. This was not sporadic shelling. It was a deliberate, overwhelming deluge. The technical specifications of the Soviet artillery, from the ubiquitous 76mm divisional gun to the monstrous 203mm B-4 howitzer, were designed for this very purpose: saturation. The 76mm ZIS-3, a workhorse, could deliver a 6.2 kilograms shell up to 13 kilometers, while the B-4, known as the Stalin sledgehammer, launched a 100-kilogram projectile over 18 kilometers. Their combined rates of fire, meticulously calculated and rehearsed, created a continuous, overlapping pattern of destruction. Production logs from Soviet factories reveal the scale of this effort. In 1943 alone, over 19,000 ZIS-3 guns were manufactured, alongside thousands of heavier pieces. This industrial output dwarfed German production capabilities for comparable heavy artillery, creating a numerical advantage that translated directly into destructive power on the battlefield. The sheer volume of munitions expended in the opening hours of an offensive was staggering, often exceeding the total expenditure of entire campaigns on other fronts. Strategically, this artillery barrage served multiple purposes. It was designed to physically obliterate forward defenses, clear minefields, and neutralize strong points. Ideologically, it was a demonstration of Soviet resolve and industrial might, a crushing response to years of invasion and occupation. The sound and fury were meant to break the enemy's will long before the infantry even moved. The German defenders, those who were not instantly vaporized or buried alive, found themselves in a landscape transformed into a lunar wasteland. Their communications severed, their command structures fractured, and their morale subjected to an unbearable pressure. The silence that had preceded the storm was now an unimaginable luxury. The initial silence that had masked the German lines shattered under the sustained Soviet barrage, transforming the horizon into a landscape of fire. The earth itself seemed to convulse, a ceaseless tremor transmitted through the packed soil and rock, felt even miles behind the front. Each concussion was a physical blow, a percussive wave that rattled teeth and loosened fillings, a constant, deafening roar that made speech impossible and thought difficult. Observation logs from forward Soviet posts detailed the immediate effects. By the third hour of the bombardment, the tree line that had offered some natural camouflage to German positions was reduced to splintered stumps and burning kindling. The dense smoke, thick with the acrid smell of cordite and burning wood, began to obscure even the most powerful optical instruments, forcing reliance on sound and the occasional flash of secondary explosions. The German trenches, meticulously dug and reinforced, began to show the strain, their earthen walls collapsing inward under the relentless pounding. Damage reports from captured German positions later cataloged the destruction. Concrete bunkers, designed to withstand direct hits from medium-caliber artillery, exhibited spalling and structural fractures from the repeated concussions of 203mm howitzer shells. Steel-reinforced dugouts, intended as command posts, were found with their corrugated iron roofs buckled and their timber supports shattered, the interiors filled with debris and the remains of their occupants. The sheer volume of ordnance, exceeding 2,500 tons per kilometer of front in some sectors, created a lunar landscape of craters, many overlapping, erasing any semblance of the original terrain. This unprecedented expenditure of shells, a logistical marvel in itself, was not merely about destruction. It was about psychological disintegration. The ceaseless noise, the constant threat of instant annihilation, the choking dust, and the pervasive smell of death eroded the will to resist. Unit diaries from the defending German formations frequently mentioned the collapse of communication lines, the isolation of forward elements, and the growing sense of futility among the troops. The strategic implication was clear: soften the enemy to the point of collapse before the infantry even moved. The horizon, once a distant line, now pulsed with an orange glow, a man-made inferno consuming everything in its path. The sustained artillery bombardment, now reaching its crescendo, systematically began to dismantle the German fortifications that had, moments before, appeared so formidable. Concrete pillboxes, designed to withstand direct hits from lesser calibers, shuddered and then disintegrated under the repeated impact of 203mm howitzer shells, their reinforced rebar twisting into grotesque sculptures against the smoke-choked sky. Observation posts, often no more than earth-covered dugouts, collapsed inward, burying their occupants beneath tons of pulverized soil and timber. Engineers' reports, compiled in the immediate aftermath by Soviet assessment teams, detailed the sheer destructive power. A typical German strongpoint, comprising 3 machine gun nests and an anti-tank gun emplacement, would receive an average of 150 heavy-caliber rounds over a 45-minute period. This concentration of fire delivering an estimated 300,000 kilograms of high explosive to a sector no larger than 200 square meters, transformed the landscape into an impassable churn of craters and debris. Beyond the physical destruction, the psychological toll on the defenders was immense. Unit diaries, recovered from prisoners, spoke of the ceaseless, deafening roar, the ground trembling beneath their feet, and the suffocating dust that made breathing a painful effort. Many soldiers, even those hardened by years of combat, succumbed to shell shock, their minds fracturing under the relentless, impersonal violence. The German command, receiving fragmented radio messages from the front, struggled to comprehend the scale of the onslaught. Logistics, already strained, buckled under the weight of the barrage. Communication lines, both buried and overhead, were severed within minutes, isolating companies and battalions. Supply routes, once meticulously planned, became impassable moonscapes, preventing the resupply of ammunition, water, or medical aid to the forward positions. The intricate web of defense, reliant on coordinated fire and rapid reinforcement, dissolved into isolated pockets of desperate resistance. The German artillery, often outranged and outnumbered, attempted to respond, but their counter-battery fire was largely ineffective against the deeply entrenched and numerically superior Soviet guns. Their own positions, once located, became targets for concentrated barrages, further diminishing their capacity to influence the battle. The air, thick with the acrid smell of cordite and burning wood, offered no respite, only the continued rhythmic thunder of incoming shells. For the German soldier in the forward trenches, the silence that had once defined their lines was now replaced by an inferno of sound and fury. Hope, a fragile commodity in war, began to evaporate, replaced by a grim resignation to the inevitable. The horizon, once a distant line, had become a wall of fire. The dawn light, when it finally broke through the lingering smoke and dust, revealed a landscape utterly transformed. What had been carefully constructed defensive positions, camouflaged and reinforced, were now churned earth, splintered timber, and twisted metal. The systematic destruction wrought by the Soviet artillery barrage left few structures intact, and those that remained stood as skeletal ruins, testimony to the immense forces unleashed. Damage reports from surviving German units painted a stark picture of the devastation. Bunker systems, designed to withstand direct hits, were collapsed inward, their concrete shattered into rubble. Trenches, once meticulously dug and fortified, had been obliterated, their precise geometries lost to the cratered terrain. Communications lines, vital for command and control, were severed in countless places, leaving isolated pockets of resistance struggling to comprehend the extent of the catastrophe. Beyond the physical destruction, the human cost was staggering. Medical evacuation records from German field hospitals documented an unprecedented surge in casualties, a grim testament to the barrage's efficacy. Many of the wounded suffered from blast trauma, shrapnel wounds, and severe concussions, their bodies and minds reeling from the sustained shockwaves. The sheer volume of incoming wounded overwhelmed existing medical infrastructure, forcing doctors to make impossible triage decisions. Interrogation files of captured German soldiers frequently detailed the profound psychological impact of the bombardment. Accounts spoke of men driven to catatonia, others exhibiting uncontrollable tremors, and many more simply unable to process the relentless terror. The constant, deafening roar, the earth-shaking concussions, and the pervasive smell of cordite and burning flesh etched themselves onto the minds of those who endured it. This was not merely a battle. It was an experience designed to break the human spirit. Unit diaries, recovered from the shattered lines, contained entries reflecting a pervasive sense of despair and futility. One entry, scrawled in a shaky hand, simply read, "The world ended here." The methodical destruction of their defenses, combined with the psychological torment, eroded morale to a critical degree. The belief in the impregnability of their positions, a cornerstone of German defensive doctrine, had been utterly shattered. The aftermath of the Firestorm was not merely a matter of rebuilding. It was a profound reevaluation of what constituted a secure defense. The sheer weight of Soviet ordnance had demonstrated that even the most robust fortifications could be reduced to dust, and the human will to resist, however strong, could be fractured under such sustained, overwhelming pressure. The silent lines had spoken, and their message was one of absolute annihilation. The ground, still trembling from the sustained concussions, now received the advancing waves of Soviet infantry. Their initial movements were cautious, probing the shattered German forward positions, but the lack of organized resistance quickly spurred them onward. The artillery had not merely softened the defenses, it had often obliterated them entirely, leaving behind craters and scattered debris where bunkers and trenches once stood. Unit reports from the 3rd Shock Army documented the initial ease of penetration, noting that the surviving German defenders were frequently disoriented, many suffering from shell shock, their communications severed. The carefully constructed lines, designed to channel and break an assault, now served only as a fragmented landscape of obstacles for the retreating few. Behind the infantry, the tanks of the Soviet Guard's armored formations began to roll forward, their engines a deep rumble that added to the lingering echoes of the bombardment. These were T-34-85s, their 85mm guns ready, supported by Su-100 self-propelled guns designed for direct fire support against any remaining strongpoints. Their advance was not a charge, but a steady, inexorable push through the ruined terrain. The German response was piecemeal, characterized by isolated pockets of resistance rather than coordinated counterattacks. Intercepted radio traffic, later analyzed by Soviet intelligence, revealed a desperate scramble for information and orders that rarely materialized. The sheer volume of fire had not only destroyed physical infrastructure, but had also shattered the command and control capabilities essential for a coherent defense. Damage assessments, compiled from captured German documents and Soviet reconnaissance, indicated that in some sectors, up to 70% of forward artillery pieces were destroyed or rendered inoperable in the opening hours. This statistical reality underpinned the swiftness of the Soviet advance, removing the primary means of German defensive fire. The horizon, which had been a wall of flame and smoke, now slowly cleared to reveal the methodical, armored progress. The objective was not merely to break the line, but to exploit the breach, to drive deep into the German rear, disrupting logistics and preventing any attempt at regrouping. The scale of the offensive was designed to overwhelm, to leave no room for recovery. The Soviet engineering battalions moved in behind the assault troops, their task to clear mines and repair roads, ensuring the continuous flow of supplies and reinforcements. Their work was critical, transforming a battlefield into a pathway for the sustained advance. The logistical tail of the Red Army, often a weakness, was now meticulously managed to maintain momentum. The initial breakthroughs, measured in kilometers rather than meters, set the tone for the coming days. The artillery had done its work, turning static defense into a fluid, retreating chaos. The methodical advance of the Soviet forces continued,